So today we're making a peony purse mini pouch, and I've put together some scrap fabrics, and I really love these fabrics. They're some of my favorite, like that I've used over the years. And then I've added in some like bandana fabric and some etching. So I really think this is pretty, and I've done like some corals and some hot pinks and then some reds and some burgundy. So all of these colors really work together well, I think. And then I'm also going to be using a 7-inch zipper and some 2-inch strips, like four 2-inch by 10-inch strips, and then also two 3.5-inch squares, and those will go on both sides of the zipper. So what I've done is I've just layered my rectangles, which are 3.5 inches by 8 inches, and I've layered two of those onto batting and then cut that out, and then I've layered that on some inside the bag fabric. So now I have like a quilt sandwich. And here what I'm doing is I just drew like two chalk lines to give me two straight lines to quilt on. And then I'm just using the edge of my foot, and I'm doing pretty narrow quilting in between these straight lines. So I'll be doing the same thing on the other sandwich as well. So these two sandwiches are going to be like the left side of our bag and the right side of our bag. So we're just going to go ahead and quilt both of these. And it doesn't take too long, but I am doing relatively heavy quilting on mine. But you definitely don't have to do that. You could quilt 2 or 3 lines and that would be perfectly fine. So once I finish like one of them with the quilting, then I just trim it down to that original rectangle size, which is the 3.5 inches by 8 inches. But I don't have anything special in my machine, so I just have a regular foot and my normal thread. I'm just running them through with a straight stitch. So the one thing that I do have a quilting needle in my machine, which is a strong needle and a sharp one. So if you do feel like your needle is kind of punching through, you might need to just replace your sewing machine needle. But when I do that, I do check to see, like, I think on mine, I'm not totally sure, but I think the painting side is in the front. So I just make sure I pay attention to that before I take my needle out, because I am not very good about figuring how to put things back together. So I just try to be really careful about how it's in there before I take it out, and then I'm able to replace it. So here I'm done with the second one, and I'm just going to trim that down as well. So now what you want to do is find the top of your quilted piece. And for mine, it doesn't really have a direction, but I did kind of pick a side I wanted to be on the top. And then we're going to add a 2-inch strip just to the top. But at first, we're going to flip it to the inside, and we're going to add it to the inside. So you do want right sides together between the strip and your piece here. So we're going to add it to the inside fabric, and then we're going to bring it around to the front, and then we're just going to re-sew on that folded edge, and that way it'll give us a nice finished binding strip edge. And then we're going to repeat that process on our second panel. So the important part of it is just to make sure that you are putting it at the top of your panel. So if you have directional fabric, you just want to make sure that that's where it is. And then we do flip it to the inside the back fabric and add it there first. And then the next step is going to be working on our zipper, and then we're going to be adding these panels to our zipper. So now we're going to be taking our 3.5-inch squares, and we want our square face up and we want our zipper face down, and we're basically just going to fold this square around our zipper, but I am placing it 1/4 inch away from where I want to sew. So now I'm folding that first edge back. And for me, like when I take my 1/4 inch seam, it's going to be snugged right up against the zipper stop. So if you have a different kind of zipper, that's fine. You just want to make sure it's right where you want that seam. We're going to do like 1/4 inch seam allowance here. So if you're worried about sewing over zipper teeth, you can always just like hand crank your machine, and that way it's going nice and slow. So if there's any issue, you'll figure that out. So now I'm going to take this inside out piece and I'm just going to trim this down, and then we're going to pull it right sides out. And it basically just extends our zipper with fabric. And then you want to do the same exact thing to the other side with the zipper pull, but you might have to pull that zipper pull out of the way. But this gives us like a nice finished look on the inside of the bag and the outside of the bag. So now we're going to take our zipper and we're going to center it on our quilted panel. So the fabric we just added, you'll probably have about 1/2 inch of that on both sides. So we just want to make sure that zipper is centered. And then we're just going to sew along that binding strip and attach it to the zipper. So it's like top stitching it to the zipper. And you can change to a zipper foot if that is easier. I'm just going to keep my regular foot here. And then when we take the seam down, we just want to try to keep it as like straight and consistent as we can. So we have this 2-inch strip. We've already added these 2 binding strips, but this is why typically I'll have these 2 match each other so that they're sitting on both sides of the zipper, so it has a really nice finished look to it. And then I have my zipper pulled out of the way, and at some point I'm going to have to pull it back up. So typically I'll just stop and then raise my presser foot. And mine, I can actually raise it a little extra high, and then I can get that zipper pulled back. And sometimes I use my seam ripper and I just put it through like the zipper hole, and then I can pull it easier and get it back to where it belongs. But I feel like this is a really quick and straightforward way to add a zipper. And I also think it looks really professional too. So now we have the first side on, and we're just going to repeat the whole process on the second side. You just want to make sure that you have your binding strip edge next to the zipper. And then we're just going to line up those 2 panels, because the more everything is like the same size and everything's lined up, it just makes it easier to assemble the bag. So you can't really clip this, but you could put a pin in it. And then I just try to get that needle in, just so that then nothing's moving around. So now I'm just going to cut all my threads and just make sure the zipper is working okay. And then I'm going to open that zipper and keep it open for this next step, because we are going to have the inside of the bags show, the inside of both sides showing. And then we're going to sew that bottom of the bag shut, and then we just need to we need to be able to turn it inside out. So that's why we have that zipper open. So now we're going to take that 2-inch strip that is for the bottom of the bag, or it's like the inside of the bag strip, and then we're going to use that to sew our bottom of the bag shut. So you could have a strip that matches your inside fabric, or I'm just going with like another bright red fabric in the inside. And now I'm doing another 1/4-inch seam here on this binding strip. And then we're also sewing the bottom of the bag shut. Then we'll just bring that binding strip around and just sew it again on that folded edge. And then when we're done sewing this, we can also trim those edges flush. So you can see how this is a great project for using up your scraps, because you can, be pulling strips out, and, if you have extra squares, you could use it for this. So it just uses a lot of the variety of like sizes of fabric you have in your scrap pile. So now I'm just clipping, I've turned it inside out, and I'm clipping these sides shut. And now we're going to add a binding strip that has about 1 inch hanging over each edge. And then when we bring this around to the other side to finish it off, I'll show you how to fold in those corners. And that way we have a binding strip that has like folded corners, and that way it totally finishes off the whole bag. And it is covering over like all the other raw edges that we've already had here, so we only need to do this at the very end. So I'm just folding these edges in, and then I'm just going to clip this. So I'm going to be folding it and clipping it, and just make sure that everything looks nice and straight. And then when we take this to the machine to sew, we just want to make sure that we sew and we back tack a stitch or two at the beginning and then a stitch or two at the end, because everything else like seams have crossed over each other, but here, since these are our last seams, we want to make sure that we do some back tacking. And if this is bulky, it was a little bulky for me, then I just basically take 1 stitch at a time, and if I need to, I'll just hand crank it. And I can also use my seam ripper to kind of guide it through my machine a little bit. But all of those things help when you're sewing a bulkier area. And then you just do the exact same thing on the other side, and then our bag is finished. So I love to add dangles to the zippers. I've like put on some key rings with some dangles here. And then I'm just filling this with pens, but like this I'm using for keys and USB drives and all that stuff that I have in my purse. So that's why I wanted to make this pouch like exactly the width of my purse. But I just think this is such a perfect size. And this is a pouch that I'm going to use all day, every day. So I'm really excited about this project. So thank you so much for watching. I'd really appreciate it if you would like and comment and subscribe. I really appreciate that, and it really helps out my channel. So thank you so much.